Hi there and welcome back. Now, as you can see, I'm not in my normal study, not least because we're moving at the moment and the place is full of boxes, but I am working here in a theatre in the north of England. Now, for those of you that have watched these videos before, you will know that I've worked in similar theatre before, and the previous time I did a theatre video was talking about using tracks and live instruments and how everything connects together. This time, however, it's a little different. Now, I am working for a company at the moment that is doing what I like to call that pink souffle of a musical. Pink because it's pink, and souffle because it's just a lot of air and nothing much more, really. That is Legally Blonde. Okay, some of you might disagree, but for this particular company, there are two firsts. The first, if you want to put it that way, is it's the first time that this company has used just tracks, and that's what I want to talk about in this video and the setup that I'm using at the moment. And the second first is also the first time that this company has used backing vocals. There is sound checks going on at the moment, as you can possibly hear in the background, but we'll get through that. Now, there's lots of debate with regards to using tracks, and I'm not going to go into that. This company has decided to use tracks. It's much cheaper, it gives a much better sound than not being able to afford the full contingent of instruments that the musical requires. And in smaller venues, we've got limited space. Mixing tracks with live instruments is by far my preference. In community and amateur theatre these days, social media is full of questions with regards to this musical is written for 26 instruments, but I can only afford 6. Well, I'm sorry, it's going to sound like it was written for 26 and you're only using 6. And what I like to do is mix those instruments with tracks as well to try and give that fuller sound if at all possible, but that's not possible in this particular musical. Now, more and more license holders these days are making available tracks for all genre of musicals, and I think that's testament in a way to how there has been a change in focus with regards to hiring live musicians, and so there are different systems. Different license holders tend to use different systems. I'm going to talk about the license holder for Legally Blonde, which is MTI, and particularly their MTI player. Principally, the MTI player was written for iOS devices or iPads or pads. The thought of touching a screen to start a track, however, fills me with dread, and I would much prefer to use it with QLab. I've had other videos on QLab. Many videos are available on YouTube on QLab. It gives you much more control. And given the fact that a show like Legally Blonde is full of cues, I mean, I think there are over 60 cues that are supplied by MTI. Once I put it into QLab and you work with the company and you work out whether they can deliver the lines in the amount of space between, a couple of pause bars, I've ended up with about 95 cues in this particular system. So QLab is a much more controllable way of working, and which I prefer. With MTI, first of all, you get 2 sets of tracks. The first set of tracks will have an RT in parenthesis at the beginning of each title, rehearsal tracks. Now, they are usually the performance tracks with a watermark over, with a nice spoken lady saying rehearsal tracks every 30 seconds, which is incredibly annoying, I must admit. You soon get used to them. And then the second set of tracks are the tracks that you would use in performance. The one good thing about MTI certainly is that 2 months before your performance, you get access to the performance tracks themselves. That gives your company way more time than they need to get used to how they're going to sound. Now, MTI needs to protect their copyright of these tracks. Of course they do. Hence the watermark. But when it comes to using the performance tracks, the tracks are actually downloaded to your computer, MacBook Pro in this case, But how does it do that and then still retain ownership of their tracks? Well, when you sign up to MTI Player, you actually agree that the system can monitor your use of your browser and, more importantly, your Finder. So you can never actually look and follow the path as to where on your computer these tracks have been downloaded. And then miraculously, at midnight on the last night of your performance, they disappear. Do they disappear? I don't know. Perhaps people that know more about this system could write in and tell me. So you can't have your browser open and your Finder open at the same time as opening the MTI Player. What we do is we take all the tracks, download them onto computer, and then we actually move them into QLab, which I'll show you shortly. Accessing your tracks can be quite confusing, even though some very good videos to help you on the MTI website. But what isn't as clear is the fact that you need to have two accounts or access to two accounts. First of all, your organization has an account, and that account is given a rehearsal code. You then need a second account or a personal account for you as the MD, who will then nominate the computer. You can have up to 2 computers, we'll talk about why in a bit, and you use that rehearsal code then to access the tracks. So that's really important to remember. So you've got the organization's account, and they give access to your user account, and it's the user account that then gets access to the tracks, and away you go. So before I show you around this setup here and how everything's connected together, let's look at how we get these tracks into QLab. So here we are in the MTI Player, and under Shows we have these 2 sets of tracks. The first set of tracks here with the RT in parentheses at the beginning, rehearsal tracks, are the first set of tracks that you have access to, but you'll notice if I switch to the performance tracks, they are exactly the same tracks. We just don't have that watermarking. Now, we could, if we wished, play any of these tracks direct from here. But we don't want to do that. We are going to import them into QLab. However, before we do that, we do need to make sure that they are downloaded. And because we have the play arrow on the right hand side of this column here, it tells me that they are already downloaded onto this particular MacBook Pro. If they weren't downloaded, you'd just get a circle there, and you could press this top button to start downloading them all. The MTI website is excellent at explaining all this. What's not quite as clear is what I'm about to do now. So you'll notice here I have an empty or an untitled workspace in QLab. This is QLab 5, ready to go. And it really is as simple as taking your track and dragging it across. And there we have the first file ready to go. Press the space bar, it's the overture. Nice and easy. What I always do, however, is you can take the rest of the production. So let's highlight the next track down, go down to the bottom, hold the shift key, take all the tracks at once and import the whole lot into a workspace. Import 68 files in this instance. Yes, we do want to do that. Progress bar comes up, and there we go. And there we have all the tracks ready to play, exactly as you would with any QLab file. Just by pressing the space bar, away we go. You do need to make sure, however, when you've saved this file, which we'll do in a moment, when we're going to open the file again, that the MTI player, should be opened first. So one of the reasons that I prefer using QLab in this instance is it's fantastic for editing. So let me just give you an example. So this particular track has 3 chords at the beginning. Let me just play this. Now, the reason I've highlighted this one is because it's one of the more simple ways of demonstrating what I want to do. So these 3 chords, between the chords there is an amount of dialogue, and it's just a quick sentence. But what we did find in rehearsals is that these chords came a little bit too quick. So it really is as simple as we've got chord 1, chord 2, chord 3 and the rest. So highlight that, hit the command copy and paste, and we could call that one, I don't know, let's say, call it 19.34 for the sake of argument, but we want that one to start at the 2nd chord. And the first one, for instance, we wanted it to finish after the 1st chord. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? And then we'll do exactly the same again. We want the copied cue just to contain the 2nd one. And then I will copy and paste that. Let's call that 19.35, and this time we'll have just the 3rd chord playing, so we'll just make sure that it starts only with the 3rd chord, like that, and then finally copy and paste one last time. Let's call that 19.36, and we'll have that play, if I can do that, we'll have that play right through to the end of the track, but we'll start it at that point. So now our first cue, it will wait until the dialogue is finished. So hit the space bar for cue number 1, and then I'll wait and I wait and I wait until the dialogue's through. Hit number 2, wait and wait till the next cue, and then cue number 3, and then finally, after the final piece of dialogue, there we go. So it's much simpler than trying to use a mobile device. Get your tracks from the MTI player into QLab, and if you know QLab, then you will just treat it like any other file. Okay, so let's start to have a look at the setup that we've got here, and I'll try to explain how everything is connected together. Now, one thing that I need to emphasize right from the onset, because we're only using tracks, I believe that it's only good practice to have 2 completely independent systems. Hence the fact that we not only have one MacBook Pro, we have a second MacBook Pro with exactly the same QLab files on. I just think that, you know, being paid to do a job, you want to make absolutely sure that technology is not going to let you down and you've got that system. So, given the fact that we have our first laptop, we'll talk about that particular one that's doing all the performance tracks. This comes out of the USB, and that USB will then go into the back of my Focusrite 4x4, you can see there. And then from there it goes. You'll see there are 1, 2, 3 outputs there, the 3rd output being backing vocals, which we'll talk about shortly. But track 1 and 2 then goes to this interface here, which goes to front of house. 2 of these will be the right and left for the track for front of house. Then we have a second computer or MacBook, and again this will have a USB out, and in this instance it's going to a borrowed second interface, which is a Sound Blaster X4, and again that will then go through to the interface that goes to front of house. But what about monitoring? How do I hear what's going off? Well, when using tracks only, I prefer to use headphones, or cans as people like to call them, and not any type of monitoring speaker. And direct from the output of both interfaces in this instance, it then goes to front of house, and front of house will then send me 3 signals back. They will send me the left and right channel for the track itself, and then they'll also send me one for the vocals. But because this sound engineer I'm using here is so thorough, he supplies me with one of these, which is a PowerPlay 16, which is basically a small mixer that you can have up to 16 channels. And you can EQ each channel independently, set the volumes independently, and then bring it to my mixer, which is what I listen. This is my phones out. So from this machine, we have here the vocals, we have float mics, and for the rehearsal purposes we have the director on this particular mic, and all that was then mixed and brought into this mixer. So I then have 2 inputs into this mixer. This first one is a mono version of the track itself, and the second one here is all the vocals. I can then mix them accordingly as and when I need to use them. I talked about that 3rd channel and backing vocals. The reason we have backing vocals on a separate channel is that they are recorded and then sent in a completely unedited way. There are no plugins, no reverb, nothing. What I need to do is to provide the sound engineer with as near to accurate representation of how it was sung in the room, but more about that, like I say, in the next video. If, for instance, I was using a live band with clicks as well, from our interface here, not only would there be 3, but there'd be that 4th output for click. So left, right, backing vocals and click are the 4 outputs, which brings me to talk about an interface. An audio interface, I would think for any MD, you need a minimum of 4 outputs. Overriding all this, and something that I've mentioned many times, is you need a good sound engineer, but even if it isn't a good sound engineer, you've got to inform your sound engineer exactly what you're planning months in advance. Don't leave it until you get to the venue, because it will be all too late. I'm really lucky here. I've got an excellent sound engineer, and perhaps you can hear in the background, he's actually recorded from the technical rehearsal yesterday some vocals, and is now EQing each vocalist. Having an excellent sound engineer. Wow. So I hope that was useful. In the next video, we're going to be looking at backing vocals and how you can add those to make your performance that little bit extra special. Hope that was useful. See you next time.